Welcome to China Today 2022. This is the last presentation of term one. I will take a 2 weeks break and then we'll come back with term two programs. Today we will finally answer the question why the world or China does not end sanction Russia. So let's get started. Why the world does not sanction Russia? Let's see. This is a map showing which countries has applied sanctions on Russia. We can see that it is the red area, which includes on the left-hand side Canada and United States. Then in the middle of the map is the European Union, and then on the bottom right is Russia, New Zealand, and then Japan and South Korea. Singapore is also one of those applying sanctions to Russia. But we can see that in terms of land area, those applying sanctions is not the largest land size. In terms of population, it is also not the largest population. So let's look at some data from Washington Post. He is talking about the global population. Only 42% applied the sanctions on Russia. The majority, the rest, the 68% doesn't apply any sanctions on Russia. In terms of populations, in voting against in a vote in the Human Rights Councils, we can see that only 24% of the countries voted in favor to remove Russia from the Human Rights Council. The rest either against or abstain, with a few actually absent from the votes. In terms of economy, the EU members represents approximately 50% of the world economy, and then there's a big chunk from the United States and Canada, which apply national sanctions. So in terms of not applying sanctions, there is only 41%. But we must look at this in a different way, because at the moment when we are calculating economy size using GDP, the emphasis has been on the service sector. There are already information talking about how that measure is not an accurate reflection of economy. First of all, in terms of using exchange rate, most countries is smaller, or actually every country is smaller than the United States. But if we convert that into purchasing power parity, for example, China probably is about 20% larger than the United States. Of course, China is still a poor country because it has 4 times the population. But in terms of economy size, it's actually much better, much larger if we measure in terms of PPP. Another important thing is in the Western countries, United States and European Union countries, many of them are service-based industry. But at the end of the day, the inability to play a games on internet is irritating. But without food or energy, that is fatal. So when we look at global economy, there is a big difference in terms of how we can look at it. And in terms of countries supplying aid to Ukraine, we see that these are 32 countries donated military equipment to Ukraine. China instead donated humanitarian helps to Ukraine rather than further weapons. When on this subject, actually each country should decide whether it should sanction Russia based on its own priorities. Of course, we know that United States have been pressuring many countries to apply sanctions on Russia, including forcing both China and India to apply sanctions to Russia. But both of these countries stand up to United States intimidation, and they are not going to apply sanctions to Russia. But here I'm asking, when you are considering your country's priority, are you really working for your citizenship, or are you working for some ideologies? Let's remind the world that the three countries, Russia, India, and China, part of the BRICS countries, represent 38% of the world's population. Just China and India together, it will represent about 37%, and the other 1.something% comes from Russia. And they represent 42% of the world production of wheat, 66% production of steels, and 45% of new nuclear plants. And at the moment, all these three countries are under attack by the Anglo-Americans. After Putin decided to invade Ukraine, the Russian ruble tumbled quickly, with 1 ruble buying only 0.7 cents due to uncertainty, international rounds of sanctions, and Russia's financial isolation, which supported the fall of its currency. In retaliation for international sanctions, Putin decided that unfriendly countries will have to pay for their gas in Russian ruble. With that, what President Joe Biden called ruble has surprisingly recovered, seeing its low level on March the 7th, as the Russian currency is now buying 1.3 cents at the time of writing, right back where it was. So it halved about its value, and then it regained most of its fall, and therefore somebody in the foreign exchange market will have made a lot of money in this sudden change within less than 1 month. This is a graph showing the ruble. It peaked, that means it lost its value, the amount of ruble net needed to buy $1, and now it's go back to where it is at the moment. Energy dependence of the Russian gas. European is heavily dependent on Russian gas. The largest dependency, of course, is Germany, and the second one is Italy, and then Hungary, Poland, etc. We must note that Hungary hasn't participated in the sanctions of Russia. Here is a graph demonstrating the European dependence of Russia's natural gas. Bulgaria, Estonia, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Sweden are all 100% dependent on Russia's natural gas. That means if they are not able to find the Russian ruble to pay for the Russian natural gas, Putin may turn off the tap which supplies natural gas to this country, and they will be in big trouble. Looking down there, we notice that Germany is one of the most important industrial country in Europe. Its dependency on Russia's gas is 39.9%. So it's almost 40% dependent on Russia's natural gas. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see the German gas supply by source. 32% is directly supplied through a land-based pipeline passing through Ukraine. That represents 32% of its energy consumption and gas consumption. Domestic storage, this came from Russia gas before, but at the moment it's sitting at 22%. As the time goes on, the domestic storage will decrease. Norway pipeline, this is again coming from Russia. It is Russia gas, 20%. And then there's a pipeline from Lithuania, which is also from Russia. Another pipeline from Czech Republic is again from Russia. So if Germany is not able to come up with ruble to pay for the Russia gas, its industry may shut down completely. In terms of food, here lists the top 10 wheat producing countries in the world. The largest producer is China. It produced 137 million tons. The second one is India, 107 million tons. The third is Russia, 85 million tons. The fourth is United States. It is almost half of Russia's production, about 60%, put it that way, about 50 million tons. Canada, another 35 million tons. France, 30 million tons. And we must also note that after Pakistan, we have the Ukraine, which is standing at 24.9 million tons. The current war in Ukraine probably will hinder the wheat sowing in spring 2022. So the Ukraine wheat production may decrease dramatically in 2022. Because of the sanctions on Russia, that means the world market may not have Russia's 85 million tons available, and therefore for countries which have to buy wheat from the world market, we are looking at a missing about 110 million tons this year. So this is a very large deficit in terms of supply. So we are expecting a very high price by the end of this year in terms of food. Hence, for those poor country, these people will suffer most because the wheat is going to cost a lot more money later on. The rise of the gas, the petroleum, the oil, also impact on the production of fertilization. The fertilizers, the price of fertilizers are also shooting up the roof, and hence will make the wheat production more costly, resulting again in higher price later in the year. For China, the main concern is that if Russia fails, China will be the next target of United States. As presented last week, we see that United States considers itself as a unique power, and it wants to maintain its hegemony by all means. So at the moment, if Russia fails, the full force will be on China. So in terms of that, China will support Russia. At least with China, India, and Russia, they will form a rather strong enter force against Americans' hegemony. Now, today I want to go a little bit deeper into a bit of theory why countries go to war. This comes from a paper by James D. Freelon. The title is Rationalist Explanation for War. And the paper is published in 1995. And it is published by the MIT Press. The screen here shows the information. You want to get it, you may like to visit the website and probably have to pay for the journal fees unless you are one of those in academic where you can access the university libraries in order to get this paper. In this paper, I will concentrate on its figure 1. It is talking about why a country, leaded by a rational leader, still may enter into war. This is a game theory types of analysis. When a country comes into war, they must think there will be a certain value. So on one side is country A, on the other side is country B. These countries both have an estimation of value if they can come to a certain agreement. Of course, this agreement need not be done by force. It can be negotiated through diplomacy. So let's put this value as X for A. And since we are talking about the value as in probability, so on the other side will be B's. So the two arrows on the left side, on the left side, that means country B is able to get all the values. The probability probably is 0 for B. On the other side, which C1 here, is when country A get all the values. But realistically, we cannot expect a country to get all the values. So A is somewhere in the middle, X. And then both sides, if they can negotiate to that values, that's good. But if they don't want to negotiate, then they have to calculate what is the value of the war, how much you have to pay for the war. So A is on this side, B is on the other side. What is in the middle? It becomes the bargaining range. Both countries have different expectations from both the war and bargaining. Of course, you win the war, you almost get the full value of this value which you are fighting for. But again, you have to subtract that from the cost of war. So, for example, in the case of a country fighting another country, if a country can overcome another one, totally conquer the country, then you will get a X amount of benefits in terms of control the country, taking its resources, etc., etc. But the cost of the war, you have to take into account how much you pay for your army, your loss of life and also the damage to the target area. So this is a rational bargaining range. There is always a rational bargaining range. Why, for example, Russia didn't bargain? There are several reasons. Obviously, for Russia, the main concern is national security. We have talked about that in previous presentation. It has to resort to war because the other side refused to bargain. The bargaining range is 0. So what do you do? Okay, so you have to use a war. That is one reason. And why the other side refused to bargain? Well, the leaders, if they enter into a bargain and if they can't see benefits, the leaders' benefits, then they won't. And when a leader decided that I'm not going to enter a bargain, I instead would like to enter into war, then we'll have to ask whether these leaders consider the cost of the war. Unfortunately, in the current government's environment, the democratically elected government, the elected politicians, if they can win a war, of course, to them, that has a great value, a great benefit. But if they lost the war, well, of course, they will suffer. But the cost of war to them is not their personal loss. It is the citizens or the soldiers paying the cost, not themselves. So there is a difference between the benefits and costs. The benefits goes all to the politicians, but the cost doesn't go to the politicians. They don't have to pay for the cost. In the worst outcome, they just left office. That's the worst outcome. But in case they get the benefit, then they reap the benefit without giving the cost. And that is exactly one very important lessons from this paper, is that we see that when Russia asked EU, NATO, and United States to consider its national security issues, EU, NATO, and United States refused. So to Russia, it is at a big cost. Just like in 1962, when then USSR put missiles in Cuba, United States consider it is absolutely not acceptable. To Russia, the same thing. If Ukraine becomes part of NATO, when Ukraine has missiles pointing at Moscow, to Moscow it is 100% unacceptable. The question here is, we have on one side a legitimate national concern. On the other side, refuse to negotiate because to the leaders on the other side, the benefit they can reap from defeating Russia or dismantling Russia is huge. The cost is of course huge, but unfortunately they don't have to pay the cost themselves. What this presentation has shown you is that, for example, for Germany, the current situation is they may cause the whole Germany economy to collapse when Russia shut off its natural gas supply to European Union. People argue, well, if I can't buy it from Russia, I can buy it from somewhere else. Unfortunately, Russia is one of the world's largest supplier of natural gas. The amount of natural gas required by gas is different from oil. The transportation of gas is either by pipelines, which has been in place for European Union, or by special liquefied natural gas, LPG, petroleum gas. LPG total world transport capacity, if all is used to supply gas to to European Union, it will only meet about 10% of European Union's needs. That means it's still the current demand of natural gas is not able to be replaced in a short time by other transportation means. Natural gas is critical for generating electricity. If you do not have natural gas as in European Union, your industry stops. The damage to the economy is huge. And in a war, and in the current situation, I think Putin will not hesitate to turn off the tap to European Union if they don't satisfy Russia's demand to pay for the gas in ruble. Why insist of ruble? Well, because if you pay in US dollars or euros, then Western countries will be able to sanction Russia and stop the payment. Basically, that means if they even say pay in US dollars or euros, Russia is not going to get any of it. And in that case, that means Russia said we are not going to be a welfare, providing welfare to European countries. So the only outcome is they have to find some way to get rubles. Where they can get rubles? In foreign currency research. But you need Russia to send out its ruble. So it has to direct to the countries which do not apply sanctions, where they can trade with Russia in mutual currencies. That means China and India will have rubles. And if European countries want to get rubles to pay for the Russian gas, they have to get it from China or India. I would suggest China do not do welfare as well. If China accepts US dollars or euros in exchange for rubles, then one day when the West sanctions China, just like Russia, is foreign research in US dollars and in euro will disappear overnight. I think for China, it is better not participate in this ruble exchange. I would suggest India going to do it. But India's economy is much smaller than China's economy. And therefore, the amount of ruble available to India will be quite limited. I think the European had picked up a big stone and dropped the stone onto their own feet. This is the presentation of this term. See you 2 weeks later. Bye-bye.